All right, awesome. Everybody, thank you all for attending. We have a wonderful guest speaker, a very accomplished guest speaker. Her name is Dr. Shanon Fronek. She is a physical therapist. She has experience working with high professional athletes, specifically in the NBA and Major League Baseball. And she's still currently a high performance physical therapist, offering her expertise more in an entrepreneurial setting and still spreading her knowledge and her experiences as well. So without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Fronek and let her tell us more about her background and her experiences, and then afterwards we'll leave it open for any questions or comments that you all may have. So the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I am really excited to share my background with you guys. As I was stating, I'm trying to state a little bit before we got started with the recording. Um, I was trying to put together something a little bit more formal, but I decided I was going to keep it more informal, share a lot more about my background and just my path overall, and just a few key things that I've learned along the way, and then leave the floor open to you all to ask whatever questions are most interesting to you and where you all are at your in that's like stage in your career, because we could take this a million different directions. So um, just to give a general background, this is more of like a snapshot, I would say, of like me, probably more of like my major accomplishments so far throughout my career. I graduated from the University of Dayton from PT school in 2014. And so now I've been practicing just a little over 10 years. And throughout that time, I've been in sports residency, worked in basketball and baseball, and now just doing some private work on the side. But when I really break this down, I wanted to try to do something like a nice infographic that shows a good, cool roadmap or something like that. And it just doesn't play out that way at all by any means. I've had so many hurdles throughout my career. And I think this is a nice way just to talk about a lot of the difficulties and hardships that sometimes and sacrifices that come with trying to pursue a career in this environment and in this setting, because it's certainly not easy, especially too when a pandemic is thrown right in the middle of it. So that was a lot of fun. So I want to just go back to grad school. My final clinical rotation was partly spent at the University of Dayton in the athletic training room. And I played sports growing up and everything, but it wasn't something that I really thought I was going to pursue professionally, especially at a higher level. But it was my final clinical rotation that really lit the fire in me. And I remember one of my clinical instructors who was dual credentialed as an athletic trainer. And at the time, when I was asking her about what do I need to do in order to pursue a career in this type of environment, and she was like, well, you could go to school, be dual credentialed as athletic trainer. There's sports residency programs available and all those things. And she was like, but it's really, really, really hard. I was like, that's fine. No, hard is no big deal. So, well, it took me a couple cycles to apply through residency. So after I graduated from PT school, I submitted a round of applications at first cycle just to go through the process and see what it was about. Because honestly, at the time, I really didn't have any sports experience. I didn't have my strength and conditioning certification. I really hadn't volunteered or done anything. So I didn't have a resume to really speak to why I should really get into the kind of program that I was looking for, because given that I didn't have a background in sports, I really wanted to pursue a residency either like in college or one that would allow me some opportunities at either at the college or like semi-professional level even. And so I was really intentional about the types of programs that I wanted to apply to, including those that would provide me opportunities for on-field experience as well, emergency medical coverage. So it took me a couple rounds before I finally got into a sports residency program, and it actually ended up not being one that I had even applied to, which is funny enough, which is why I want to share this story because a lot of people, the more I talk to people, a lot of these kind of funky things like this happen where I was actually interviewing at the time for I live by an airport, so I apologize. Can you guys hear the airplanes in the background? No? Okay, cool. Because I just moved into my new place. I'm in a new apartment. I have no furniture except for the one chair that I have outside on my balcony. So that's where I'm doing this right now. So I'm glad that you guys can't hear all the noise in the background. But um, so I was interviewing for the sports residency at John Hopkins when it first came, when it was, I guess I forget what it's called, but when it essentially like wasn't even credentialed yet. And Andrew Naylor was the director at the time, and um, it was like he came up to me at the end. He was like, "Well, I don't think you're a good fit for this program, but I see your potential and I want to help you." And he was like, "Let me help you with your resume. Let's be more intentional about your purpose and your goals. Here's what I think you could have done better with on your during your interview process. And by the way, St. Francis University just had a candidate drop and they need to fill the spot. Are you interested?" I'm like, well, yes, because this was my last shot, like my last cycle applying. I told myself that if I didn't get in within a few years, that I honestly contemplated going back to medical school. I was contemplating a few different things at the time, to be honest. But um, so luck had it, and it all worked out. But I owe a lot of my career to Andrew Naylor because if it wasn't for him, just kind of like I think what it was is he just saw a lot of like himself in me and just took the time to invest in me as a person. And that's one of the things that I would also encourage you all to do, especially if you do decide to pursue some kind of education outside of PT school or anything like that. It's just take the time to find the people who are willing to invest in you. And because not everyone you talk to, right, is going to want to just organically help you. And so it's those kind of fun relationships that you make along the way by networking and reaching out and making some of those connections that can, you'd be surprised like how far they can go sometimes. And so we're still really close to this day. Every CSM, I love seeing him and just catching up with him. So, but yeah, so that was my first hurdle was getting into residency. Um, and then, I mean, even too, at that time, those first 2 years when I was practicing in private practice, or the first year I was practicing in private practice, I started wanting to volunteer locally and cover different events. And I ran into political issues with, you know, certain companies being contracted with certain events. And then so I wasn't able, I was running into a bunch of roadblocks, even just trying to volunteer. So then just I did a local travel physical therapy position, which kind of like freed me up, I guess, so to speak. So then I was able to start doing more volunteer events like where I was at. And I started volunteering for the sports academy, doing some more public relations type of stuff with them, promoting some virtual runs, just some different things like that to get more involved within the academy. And then as I already mentioned, I finally got into my sports residency in 2016 and finished that up in 2017. And once I, you know, was finishing that, I was pretty stubborn and probably somewhat unrealistic about how easy it was going to be to just, you know, get a job in professional sports. Because when I did the sports residency, I loved working at the college level. But I also was still really interested in pursuing, you know, professional sports. So I told myself that I was, again, going to take some time to continue to build my resume, build my skill set. So I did travel physical therapy, which has its own unique challenges. And I'll kind of talk about that in a minute, because I don't necessarily recommend that when you're trying to do what I was doing. But so building my manual therapy, toolbox, I would say. So I did the AAMT's manual therapy fellowship, because for me personally, while I was very much so interested in performance and sports science and athletic training, all of those things, and all of those things were different avenues that at some point I knew that I would tackle in my career. I saw me being able to differentiate myself among my peers in that way, especially when you're involved with day-to-day player care and getting a player to feel good enough to be available and ready to play is key. So that ended up working out pretty well for me, and was again one of the things that helped me enter into and get my job with the 76ers. And then I also ended up doing, sorry, I apologize about the typo, AASPT, but I ended up doing the Kevin Wilk Traveling Fellowship as well, which helped get me some traction from different professional sports organizations, probably just because of the name, just more so like curiosity and what it involved and stuff like that at the time. And so I do recommend that as well to people who are trying to get into professional sports or just even college or something like that. It's a really great networking opportunity to meet high level clinicians across the country and just see what everyone else is doing. And again, it definitely opened up some doors. So that's one thing that I try to highlight as well. And then finally in 2019, I'll never forget, because I was volunteering at the U.S. Olympic training facility in Colorado Springs when I got the call that I was offered the position with the 76ers in their G League affiliate. So it was like, what? Like, this is crazy. Like, I'm like working here with professional athletes, and now I get like to go 2 weeks later and, start working in the NBA. I'm like, this is so cool. So, yeah. Then, so my role, just to give you guys an idea too about what my role was with the 76ers and their G League affiliate. So I was kind of like a bridge between the two teams. So I traveled, I did everything with the G League team. I was there for every practice, every game. Like I said, on the road with them. The only time I didn't travel with the team is if we had an acute rehab who would benefit from staying back at the facility, because our resources are far greater when you're at home than when you're away. You're really limited sometimes on resources depending on where you're at sometimes, especially in the G League. And then I also helped manage our two-way players. So those are if you're not familiar with basketball, the players that'll go back and forth between two teams. And then any of the longer-term rehabs I would manage as well. And so I really enjoyed that role. I love that role. And then the pandemic happened, so it was short-lived, unfortunately. And I had a really unique role within the NBA, just because my boss at the time, Scott Epsley, who again I owe a lot of my successes to, because he structures his medical department differently than some other organizations. And again, I'm just speaking to my experiences then. I'm sure a lot has changed since. So again, just don't expect this to be an expectation anywhere else. Every organization and every director is different. But he structures things a little bit differently. So our philosophy is very much so lined up. He's originally from Australia, so he's a lot more heavy in some of the manual therapy concepts, very heavy in differential diagnostics, having a really strong critical thinking skills. He very much so believes that everyone needs to excel at their particular role. So he prefers me to function and wear my PT hat, the AT to function and wear their hat, and the strength coaches to function and sports science coaches to wear their hats, instead of some more of like the hybrid model that you typically would see today, I think. So a lot of how people always ask, well, how did you get your foot in the door? And a lot of it was just timing and fit, honestly, and philosophy. And that's what it has been too. Even as I went on to get my job with the Mariners, it had nothing to do with who I know or anything like that, which is pretty cool, I guess. But it definitely made things a lot or a lot harder on myself. Um, so then the other challenge, though, that with the pandemic and losing my position with the Sixers at the time was that there weren't any other roles similar to mine, maybe like internship type roles. But you have to think too, I don't know how much student loan debt y'all got. Hopefully it's less than mine, but I have a lot. So when you're working already at like a $50,000 an hour salary for the G League, and then you're considering having to take $20,000 cut additionally for an intern role after you've, already done what you've done, that's pretty tough. So I didn't get my foot back in the door with basketball, but I decided to try to grow in different ways. So I did an internship for a few months at Southern Methodist University working with football, primarily helping out with more of their like correctives in the weight room, just doing some little bit of hands-on stuff with some of the players and things like that. But at the time, I wasn't getting paid. I was sleeping on a mattress in the program director's spare office. And I had enough stuff with me that could fit in my car. And I was waking up at 3:30 in the morning to be there to take attendance when I had all this experience. And this is nothing against like SMU or anything like that. It's more so to highlight that's not what I was there for. I wasn't going to not make money to take attendance and fill goodie bags. And so I ended up leaving. There were still things that I took away from that experience, but that was a bridge that I had to burn and know the consequences of that, because a lot of people that are connected there are still good friends of mine today. But that's a decision that I had to make at the time. It's just like, where do I want to spend my time, and who's like showing me my worth and value in that way. And that just wasn't helping me in the way that I needed at that time. So eventually I ended up going back and doing travel physical therapy and taking a clinic director role in 2022 and moved to Arizona, because I was like, at least if the challenges with being a travel physical therapist, especially as when you're early career, and I don't mean to sound bad against like any people I've worked with in the past, but the reality is that a lot of those locations have challenges for a reason. And you are oftentimes, not all the times, but oftentimes surrounded by complacent clinicians, other people who are early career, not necessarily people that you would trust to talk shop with or something like that. And especially when you're used to working with other very high level thinkers, that can be very challenging and frustrating. So it's always funny too, because people always look at and see my list of continuing education, like, you've done so much continuing education. It's like, well, there's a reason for that, because I have to go get it and supplement it elsewhere. Otherwise, I'm not going to get the kind of experience and education that I need. So then I finally had the opportunity to work with the Seattle Mariners. I had a job offer in February 2013. So I started off spring training with them. And I really enjoyed that role my first season when I was with them, because it was very similar to my position when I was in basketball. In terms of me, I was traveling with the AAA affiliate. So if you're not familiar with baseball, you have your big league team, and then AAA is the level below. So similar scenario to like the NBA and the G League, so to speak, in a way, except AAA, you'll have a lot more veteran players who had showtime, So it's a lot more of a mature environment, I would say, and not as high as pressure as working in the MLB, but you still have some pressures, especially because you have players that are constantly going up and down. Um, like we utilize a lot of our relief pitchers. So when people, like when one of our big league players would go down or something was going on, we would oftentimes have to send people up. So AAA is a revolving door, which has its own challenges. But I loved it. I loved the chaos. I loved being in the trenches with the guys. I, enjoy being involved with the day-to-day maintenance type of stuff as well as the injury type of stuff. And for me, that was the best of both worlds because in during the regular season, I was doing what I did before, and then in the off season, my role was to be based at our training facility in Peoria, Arizona, where I would assist with our long-term rehabs. So I got to do a little bit of everything, which I really really enjoyed. And then unfortunately, though, they decided that the role wasn't working out for the organization. Um, there's like politics and other stuff associated with that, and like salary caps, blah blah blah. But um, there's typically like reasons when those kind of things transition and change. And so my role transitioned to being at the complex for the next season, where I was only doing long term rehab, which again, I mean, I like long term rehab. That's my job as a physical therapist. But again, I really enjoy being in the trenches with everybody. So I decided at the end of actually, I knew honestly going into last season that depending on who our new manager was, whether or not I would end up staying. And then, so I left at the end of last September um, for various reasons. But I think one of the things that I've come to appreciate over the last couple of years is just mainly like the shift in my values. And, before when I started off, I was in the headspace of this is everything and everything I've always wanted, and I will do whatever it takes. And just that mentality where now I just see things, other things a little bit different. Like now I care more about like investing in like having a family potentially like one day or like the future or what, the next 5 or 10 years look like. And after having moved literally every year for the past 10 years, sometimes multiple times within the same year, for me, moving again just was not in the cards. I just needed a break from it all. Because I too had an opportunity to go again work with one of my former bosses and pivot to women's soccer. And, you know, at the end of the day, I was just tired. So from it all. And so I needed a little break. Um, So there's still possibilities for it to happen again in the future. But for right now, that's one of the realities of working in that industry is you could very well end up moving every year. And I know other people that have as well. Um, but for me, with salary, how old I am in my career and just how old I am in general. Um, and not doing exactly what I wanted to be doing, I decided that there were things that meant a little bit more to me. And if I had the right opportunity that came along that met some of my other requirements, I would take it. But that just didn't happen. So now I'm in a position to where I get to be a little bit more choosy, and that's okay, and that's cool. But I've also been able, one of the nice things about being in Arizona and the Arizona market um, is probably have something similar to this in Vegas now, or at least building. But there's a lot of professional athletes out here, especially with baseball. So it's been a really easy market to shift into doing some of my own stuff privately. So now I do some consulting work. Um, I don't know if you guys are familiar at all with arm care. Ryan Croton, he's one of my mentors too that I was interviewing with when he was a director with the Angels. And then he got fired. And so I didn't get hired with him. And that was like before I took the job. How this all works out is so crazy all the time. I'm telling you guys. So now I do consulting work with him where I'm helping out now a lot more of like our youth overhead athletes and incorporating some of the technology that he uses for that, and still working privately with some of the players that I've worked with in the past. And then I'm also working a couple days a week at one of uh, Banner Physical Therapy built a high performance center out here, which is pretty cool. So they have a mound, they have a basketball court, they have, football field and a bunch of fun technology to collect a bunch of data. So that's been really exciting. And now I get more free time to do things like this. And yeah, so I'm really enjoying having more downtime this year and just taking some more time and space for myself just to explore some other things and be creative and just step out of that environment for a little bit. So that's kind of my really crazy roundabout background. Um, and then, so some hard realities, I've touched on some of these before, but knowing your values and what you're willing to sacrifice, this is a big thing that I've shifted with over, like I've been saying, over the last couple years. It's obviously been really challenging for me to shift after working in professional sports to go back to a clinic. And in fact, too, that's why I told my current boss, I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. Like, I can't promise you that I'm going to be here at the end of February. I just really don't know. Right now, I think I'm going to stay, but you never know. So it is really important to know what your values are and like what you're willing to sacrifice, because if you do decide to pursue that route, it does require a lot of sacrifice, potentially financially, certainly personally within like your like relationships personally and within your family. A lot of people that work in professional sports end up divorced, or a lot of women that I know end up not having families. And luckily, a lot of that's changing to have more support for females that work in the professional sports industry, especially those with families. But I couldn't imagine that would be easy by any means, because you are married to the job first and foremost. And if that's not your mentality towards it, you're going to unfortunately rub some people the wrong way. That doesn't mean that it should always be that way, but that's just the way it goes sometimes. So you have to be willing to compromise and adapt to the environment. One of the mistakes I made probably going into my first season in baseball was thinking that it was going to be the same as basketball for whatever reason. That was not the case. Like the communication structure was different. I think the expectations of what I thought my role was going to be versus what my colleagues' expectation of what my role was going to be was a little bit different. Because a lot of times baseball is big on hierarchy and communication structure. So that was something that I had to learn to appreciate. Again, when I was in basketball, the head athletic trainer and I had a lot more shared responsibilities and were like collectively a lot more involved with communicating to coaches, to my boss, his boss, front office, all of those things. So those are some things that you may not expect. Brett Brown, the one day I heard him say, I only have so many bullets in my gun, referring to he's got to put out his own fires and he's got to be choosy and picky about what fires he wants to like tackle and put out. And same thing for us. You have to be careful about how you handle certain situations with different people. Unfortunately, people can be a little sensitive and similar to their egos. And so you don't want to make the wrong person upset, because that can make your job a lot harder. So it becomes its own craft to figure out how you're going to utilize some of those bullets. And I didn't want to put that on the page because I was like, I don't know if I can get in trouble for that or using that. So just blank this part out. That's not acceptable. But another big lesson that I learned, especially after losing my position with the Sixers, is just not to take anything personal from anyone. Know who you're getting advice from and like who your people are. A lot of the times, or I shouldn't say a lot of times, I should say from my experiences, maybe people that I thought had my back or were looking out for my best interests didn't. Um, and so that was a hard reality because I just thought at certain times, like, oh, cool, like we're all up here now. And like, why wouldn't we want to support everyone? And but not everyone thinks that way. And some people are very about themselves. So you need to be careful about who you're sharing information with, who you're taking, feedback and information from. And that goes same thing, like the higher you go, sometimes the smaller your circle gets, unfortunately. But also too, learning from my past background, don't burn bridges. And if you are going to burn that bridge, you need to be very okay with the consequences that is associated with that. Like I said, I had a lot of people who knew people in professional basketball. And so I could pretty much bet on never getting a job with a certain organization, even though, like, on a personal level, I'm cool with everybody else. But unfortunately, I had to make a choice that was best for myself and my own development and finances at the time to, leave a certain situation. And sometimes that's what you need to do. But that's why sometimes too, it's really important to ask the right questions going into things. Now I'm much more, I will do stuff for the right fit at the right time, not just take anything. And especially because, again, early career, just trying to get your foot in the door, but that environment is so intense and it requires so much energy. And if you're not necessarily surrounded by the right kind of people, it's easy to get like sucked into, I don't know, some just more like, it's easy to get sucked into things that don't necessarily serve your career long term, I would say. Um, so making sure that, again, you're aligning yourself with things that with people and organizations that align and superiors that have your back and those kind of things. And so now when even I do, now when I go into panel interviews with sports teams, I spend most of my time asking people questions about the environment, just how they interact with people. One of the questions that I asked the panel the one time was, just if you could, I want you to tell me one positive thing about a coworker on this panel, and you can't use the same person twice. And for me, that was there were sports scientists, just to give you some context, sports scientist, strength coach, director, athletic trainer. I think there was one more person. And what I was really looking for to see was just how people spoke about other people, and also too, but what they said about their leader. Because a lot of times that gives you good insight into the kind of environment that you're going into, and yeah, those kind of things. So I know I've said a lot of, scary things maybe, or negative things, but these are just some of like the hard realities that sometimes you don't necessarily think about when you go into this kind of environment until you're there and you're like, oh crap, now what do I do? For me, everything has absolutely been worth it. I don't regret a single thing that I've done. I've learned a ton along the way, and I'm so grateful to everyone that's been a part of like that process and journey. But it definitely hasn't been the easiest one. So if I can help make anybody else's path easier than mine was, I will happily do that. So I think that was actually like the last slide that I had. So I'll just go back. I don't know. How do I stop sharing? Do you guys? Oh, stop share.
Awesome. Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. So I figured I would just like leave the floor open to you guys. And just whatever other questions that y'all may have for me.
Yeah, before we get to questions, I'm gonna give some comments. I'm happy that you gave like a real in-depth presentation of your experiences because as kids, we've all been lied to. Go to school. If you go to college, get your degree, and you get your good paying job, and everybody thinks it's just a linear transgression when that's not it. You're
Yeah.
here, down, and you may be down for a minute, then you get up, and then boom, you're back down again until you find that one opportunity for you that keeps you afloat. And also giving like the real of your experiences, like working with these different organizations, interacting with these different personalities. That's something that our students and others need to hear and need to learn about because it's things that really can't be taught in the classroom. Those are things that can only be learned based on experience. So I'm definitely appreciative of you giving the raw about what it was like in your career, the things that you went through, like sleeping on your director's mattress in his office. Like I've heard that story plenty of times. I know all about like the long nights, early mornings, constantly moving from city to city. If you want to work in sports, that's a raw reality. That's what you have to be able to do. You'll find that 5% that actually did have it work out perfect for them, but overall,
Yeah.
that's not the reality. So
Well,
that
I
being,
appreciate you saying that. Yeah, because if you could, there would have never been a day in my wildest dreams that at 5 years out of school that I would be sleeping on the worst mattress in my entire life, not getting paid. So yeah, like yeah, so cool. I'm glad that you found that helpful.
yeah, I'm happy that you shared it because that's a raw reality for those who want to start their career. Sometimes sacrifices like that got to be made because you got to build a resume up so you can get that decent or good paying position. So
Yeah.
with that being said, I am going to leave it open for questions for anyone who may have any questions for Dr. Fronek. The floor is open. I'm gonna get behind the camera and pivot to whoever, because we got more people. This is just what's showing on the camera, but so whoever has a question, go ahead, answer away.
I guess I have one. Uh, I'm a PT student right now in my second year. I'm kind of looking towards sports residency, or at least that was kind of my dream, kind of going into PT school. But hearing different people's stories about how it goes, it's like, oh yeah, it was great because it helped me get this. And other people like, I didn't really care for it afterwards, but I have the SCS. So just kind of like the pros and cons, like what it gave you or what things you could have done through experience instead.
Oh, like, are you okay? So are you asking me if it's was worth it to do the sports residency versus just pursuing experience to go the SCS route?
Yeah, I guess like kind of the pros and cons for you, your experience with just residency itself.
Okay. Yeah. My so what I always tell people who are looking to apply for sports residency, let me preface this first. It's know what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish because there's a lot of sports residents out there you could very well go and do that aren't going to help you accomplish your goals, and at which point it's a waste of time. Um, so I if you're doing it for the alphabet soup, like I mean, just practice for a couple years and pay all that money to go take that test and that hard test, which you may or may not need to take a time or two again, like I did, and dedicate all your life. I mean, there are the so going the sports residency route for me personally, I it helped me a lot with just knowing how to communicate with other providers in that type of environment, knowing how to communicate, like just in general, really what athletic trainers are looking for, what like sports docs are looking for, just different things like that. Getting a better idea of some of the challenges that like the players face at that level as well, and which I'm sure I probably can't even appreciate how different that is now with some of the different like standards and stuff like that. But a lot of it for me was to get the on-field experience because that's something that I wasn't able to get elsewhere otherwise. My program was they were close with, was it Pitt or something? So we did a lot of concussion rehab. So I felt very strongly in that coming out of residency more so than some of my peers. There were certain aspects of it that I felt like really good about. But for me, I know that I got out of it what I needed to accomplish. Or I saw nothing but college athletes all day, every day. I got to cover basketball, women's lacrosse, football, women's soccer. I got to do some hybrid experience in the weight room for basketball. Sports science. I worked at a very, I don't know if you're familiar with St. Francis University, but it's a very small Division I school, so they don't have a lot of money or high budget or anything, so they don't have a lot of resources. The sports science wasn't a thing there really. The con of it, I guess, was the network. I think you see in professional sports now the network or the tree in which you come from very much so can help make your path a little bit easier. So if I got to choose, to do it different, then I would have chosen maybe like a bigger name school or something like that, or a bigger name program that just would have made my path a little bit easier because my network would have been so much larger. Because I don't even think the residency program exists, unfortunately, anymore now. But yeah, and honestly too, it's not like it for me. It doesn't give me any more value as a clinician. A lot of what I felt actually far more advanced as a clinician after my year with the Sixers than I did from taking like the board certification exam. So I think it just very much so depends on what your experience is, who your mentors are, and different things like that. Because I do think it can help to excel and accelerate your critical thinking skills much more than somebody else. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
I'm an undergrad here, and I was wondering, like, what advice would you give to someone like me who would try to determine what career I want to go to in the future? Because I'm not entirely sure what I want to do after I graduate my bachelor's.
Did you hear?
I heard, what advice would you give to someone? I heard undergrad. What advice would you give to somebody?
Yep.
And then I couldn't the rest.
Yep, that was basically the gist of the question. He's an undergrad and he wants to know what advice would you give someone like him? Finish
Oh,
up.
okay. That you're trying to figure out what route you want to go?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would capitalize on as a student, whether you're in undergrad or a PT school, is take advantage of the time as a student. It's so much easier to get opportunities to observe, volunteer, go shadow, get yourself in positions. If you think you want to go be a physical therapist, go shadow a physical therapist. If you think you want to be a sports PT, go shadow a sports PT. There is no better way to figure out if that is the kind of environment and that is what you want the rest of your life to be every day than to just put yourself in it. And it is so much easier as a student than when you're early career or a professional. People are just a lot more willing and open to open their doors and allow you to come in and shadow than once you're early career professional, which is why I tried to highlight early on in my career, some of the challenges that I faced when I first got out of school, when I was trying to get some of those volunteer opportunities. Because there's other factors that go into that. So that would be my best advice.
Any other questions from anybody? No? Okay.
No.
We're gonna have a fun round of rapid fire questions.
Okay.
I don't know, you might have touched this and I missed it, but could you tell us where you're from or what do you claim as home originally?
Yeah. So Cleveland, Ohio is where I grew up.
All right, awesome. So first question, would you rather see the Browns win the Super Bowl or Cavaliers three-peat?
Browns. I've been living for that day my whole life so far still. I've already seen the Cavs. That was sweet.
Next question, do you think you can hit a three-pointer over Joel Embiid or you think you can hit a single off a Mariners pitcher?
Well, right now, Joel, because he's out.
Okay. Yeah, you're from Cleveland, Ohio. Who's the best music artist or music band to ever come out of Cleveland, Ohio?
Oh shit, my dad would be so mad at me.
Matter of fact, give me your top three.
I don't really even know who's come out of that's so bad. I've never been even to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or anything like that. I feel like I'm a bad Clevelander right now. Don't tell him. Don't tell him. He'd be very disappointed. He is like a music junkie.
Well, one person from Cleveland, Ohio was Machine Gun Kelly. Yay or nay?
That's a lot of drama right now. I'll just say nay. I like these questions. These are good.
Last question. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
No.
All right. Okay, cool. There it is.
What's the room say?
What?
I see more so no.
Well, apparently in this room we still believe in DEI, so hot dogs go both ways. That's what we got.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you for your presentation. Please stay on afterwards. We're about to stop the recording. So thank you for your presentation. Everybody, please give Dr. Fronek another round of applause. We really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah,
So
of course.
we'll